All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Nasia Safdar. I'm the Faculty Director for the Clinical Trials Community of Practice. And today we have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Rafael Veintimilla, who is the Senior Medical Director of Clinical Research and Operations at the UW Clinical Trials Institute. Rafael brings with him a wealth of experience, but today in particular, we're interested in hearing his thoughts on clinical trials, reportable events and incidents, and the trials and tribulations associated with that. Thank you very much, Rafael, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nazia. It's great to be with you. So the investigator and sponsor responsibilities, I just want to clarify, there's been a little bit of confusion about investigator sponsor. So just reviewing some definitions. The investigator is a person responsible for the conduct of the clinical trial at a site. If the trial is conducted by a team of individuals at the site, the investigator is the leader of the team. This investigator at the site level ensures that AEs, SAEs, unanticipated events, and other issues are documented, assessed, and reported according to the protocol, the requirements of their IRB, and ancillary review groups. It's also important to understand that the responsibility and accountability ends with a PI. Study coordinators, other staff can help this PI gather information about AEs and SAEs, but it's the principal investigator that must do, he or she, assess the SAE, the relationship to the study drug, the severity, and make a document about it. Then, of course, we have the investigator-initiated research or investigator-initiated trials that we have here at the IIT. That's when the investigator is also the sponsor. The research developed, initiated, and managed by an individual in which they have written, execute, or recruit other investigators to execute the protocol. So in this case, the investigators taking the place of a pharmaceutical company, the NIH. They've written the protocol, they're the investigators, and they have to maintain the IND, IDE with all the regulatory submissions, safety reports, and annual reports to the FDA, NIH, and so forth. And also it's important to mention, as I will later say, it's the responsibility of the sponsor investigator to notify all the investigators of the participating sites of updates of safety reports, IND safety reports, and unanticipated events. So the IND application sponsors are required to notify in a written safety report. So once a site has an adverse event or unexpected adverse event that is serious and unexpected, that site PI has approximately 14 days to notify the IRB and to notify the sponsor. Once the investigator sponsor receives that information, they have 15 days to report it to the FDA. And once the FDA recognizes or acknowledges the submission, the sponsor investigator has the responsibility to disseminate this to all the participating sites of the results or the report. Unexpected, fatal, or life-threatening suspected adverse reactions have a shorter reporting time. Even within our UW system, we report deaths that are related and unexpected within 1 business day to the IRB as soon as we find out. And then as this investigator sponsor, you have 7 days to respond to the FDA and notify the FDA. Again, this will become an IND safety report via the FDA acknowledgement, and then this investigator sponsor will have to disseminate it to all the sites that are participating in the trial. The follow-up reporting, as you can imagine, we have to report things in 1 day here at the site, and then the sponsor investigator has to report it within 7 days. So of course, that would be considered the initial report to the FDA. And the important thing here is that we have to follow up with follow-up 1, follow-up 2 with information as it's coming in to understand and to be able to assess this death or serious unexpected event. So the FDA and the investigator sites are expecting these follow-up reports to be able to complete this reporting requirement. In reporting adverse events or events and incidents, we have 7 categories. Normally, a lot of people, investigators and staff, like to think that we only report adverse event or anticipated problems, but we also have the obligation to report to the IRB protocol violations, deviations, breach of PHI, incarceration of a participant, new safety information, emergent modifications, and regulatory visits to the inspection. We also anticipated events. Why is important? Anticipated events that represent risk or harm to study participants and others, including family members, research team members, hospital, clinic staff, or others as appropriate. It's not just thinking about the adverse event that happens to a participant, it's any event that happens related to the study. Reporting anticipated events requires consideration of risk or harm to others, not just the participant. The PI must take action to protect the participant or others from the previous unknown risk of harm. So as you can see, the main responsibility of the PI is maintaining the safety of not only the participants, but of the study team. If you have questions about this chart, this is from the IRB here at UW Health. I put the link there at the bottom right-hand corner, but this is where to start. If it's a device and it's an event that's unexpected, and it is yes, we have 10 days to report to the IRB. Here at UW, we have 1 day reporting that would be for death, 10 days reporting that it's for device trials, and 14 days to report anything else that's related to the study. So I don't know if you can read this right, but it says, was the event caused by participation or association of the participant? If it's yes, is the event unanticipated in nature or severity? If it's say yes, if it goes to death, it's reported to 1 day. If we say no, it's the adverse event at greater risk for other study participants. Yes, we report it within 14 days. So this is important. And if you go to the IRB website, you have other information of what they consider reportable within 14 days, all the details that they have. So let's review what unanticipated event is. It has to meet all the following criteria. It has to be unexpected in nature, and it has to be related or possibly related to the participation of the research and suggest greater risk of harm to participants or others. So if we just take unanticipated events without considering adverse events, we would have that an unanticipated event, an example would be a defective investigational device that causes harm to the investigator. This is an unanticipated problem. It's unexpected in nature. It's related to the study and suggests greater risk. Even though the investigator is the one that's getting the harm from the device, it could be shock, it could be a poke, or whatever we want to consider. This has to be, because it's a device related, it has to be reported to the IRB within 10 business days. Another example is we're drawing blood with a patient that has a hepatitis B, and the person that's drawing the blood, the study coordinators, pokes themselves. This has to be reported within 14 days because it's an unanticipated event, not related to the device, so it's a 14-day reporting. But again, it's the harm to the study staff, not just to the patient. But when we talk about adverse events, an adverse event is, of course, a new symptom, worsening of an existing condition, clinically significant abnormal lab findings. In other words, it's an unfavorable medical or psychological event experienced by the study participant, not necessarily associated with the investigation agent or protocol, and the events that occurs more commonly in clinical trials. So for example, here we said clinically significant abnormal labs. You as the PI, as the site, you have to make sure to review all the clinical labs and mark which ones are clinically significant and give an explanation. And you have to document that you review these labs and annotate it correctly. Once those adverse events are marked, we have to go and make the assessment if it's related or not related. But most of the adverse are not reportable because they're not necessarily they're expected because it's mentioned in the consent protocol in the investigator brochure. They might not be related to the participation of the trial and does not suggest a greater risk. So again, just summarizing, the observed AE or incident of an unanticipated event has to meet all three: unexpected and possibly related and greater risk to participants. We have to report it to the IRB in 14 days. That 5 days is if it's a VA study. We have to report it at 5 days if it's a VA study at the VA. And I mentioned here at continuing review, some IRVs require us to summarize unexpected or adverse events at the continuing review. That means at the year of review of the study. Usually it's done 364 days or less. And this way, the IRB will be able to look at the summary of all the adverse events or unanticipated events and make an assessment if there's some issues with the study protocol, the setup, or increased risks. That's the only way the IRB can do it. But as responsibility for the PI, they have to make the assessments every single time according to their study to make sure that they have no trends or consistency failures, negligence, or whatever it might be. So here's an example. A study participant experiences acute kidney failure after the first month of the trial. The participant has no risk factors for kidney failure. The informed consent does not identify kidney failure as a study risk. This is an adverse event because it's an unanticipated problem. It meets all three criteria as unexpected, possibly related, and greater risk. So we have to report it within 14 days. At the time of continuing review, the PI provides the summary. Remember, I mentioned this. It's important to understand all anticipated events. And if we can make an analysis or review, and this can be delegated to the study coordinator to keep a log of all the adverse events so we could notice trends, complications, or a repeating symptom or situation that the patients are participating so we can make a better assessment. The IRB continuing review process ensures that the IRB considers relevant information received since the submission of the latest progress report or the initial review. That's why it's important to give the IRB all this information as a summary of adverse events, anticipated events at the continuing review. And then, of course, the IRB will make the determination to reapprove it for another year based on the risks and benefit of the study. Serious adverse events. The serious adverse events, according to OHRP and FDA, are the following: death, life-threatening condition, new or prolonged hospitalization, cause or persistent significant disability or incapacity, results of congenital anomalies or birth defects, require intervention to prevent permanent impairment or damage in the device trials, or other serious or important medical events that may require medical or surgical intervention to prevent one of the outcomes above. So serious adverse events, you will have to follow specifically what the study protocol mentions. And of course, the study protocol is the recipe. We can't change it. We can't modify it. And the protocol will tell us if death is an endpoint, they'll mention there that you don't have to report it. For example, in a terminal disease or when death is expected, death will be an endpoint and it's not reported as a serious adverse event. If it's not an endpoint, death will be reported as a serious adverse event. So please, the protocols tell you what are serious adverse events, what are adverse events, when do we start to capture. Some protocols will require you to capture adverse events from the signing of the consent form and the serious adverse events from the study intervention. Other trials will say you capture everything from the signing of the informed consent. So you have to be very clear what the requirements of that study protocol is. So if we have a death, when do we report death? The death of an interventional study participant that is unanticipated event, immediately life-threatening or severely debilitating, we have to report it to the IRB. What in one business day, especially if it's unanticipated or immediately life-threatening, and a continuing review. Example, the study participant develops kidney failure after taking the investigational drugs and dies. The informed consent does not identify kidney failure as a study risk. The participant was not at risk for kidney failure before enrolling in the study, and the death appears to be related to the study. So this meets all the three criteria, and we would have to report it. The death of an interventional study participant that is not an anticipated event was just reported a continuing review. Example, a study participant in a passenger car dies from his injuries. The PI determines that it's not related to the protocol, does not meet all three criteria for an anticipated problem. The death of a study participant who is a non-interventional study in a health survey is not reportable. Do not report. Example, a study participant in a health services study only of member use of online services dies while hiking in Switzerland. We do not have to report that. Does not meet all the criteria. So we have 3 steps to determine if an adverse event or an anticipated event is reportable or not to the IRB in 14 days or to the VA in 5 days. The first step is to determine if it's unexpected. It's in nature, severity, or frequency, given what? The study protocol, the informed consent, the investigator brochure, the PI's knowledge of the characteristics of the study population, the expected progression of the underlying disease or condition of the participant, and the participating predisposing risk profile of the adverse event. So we have to take all that into consideration. If nothing meets or it's not in the protocol consent or investigator brochure, it would be unexpected. The second step would be, is it caused by participation in the research study? So if there's an existing condition of the participant that is not exacerbated by the intervention or other circumstances unrelated to the research, we do not have to report if it has these 2. If it just meets the first one, the participation in the research study, it's reportable. So for example, here it's very important for adverse events or any type of event, that we capture the medical history correctly of all the illnesses of the patients or problem list. So if you have a patient that has asthma, acute asthma, and it's been hospitalized in the past because of the asthma attacks, Signs Informed Consent participates in your study and has an asthma attack and is hospitalized, you can refer back and say, this is similar to the hospitalizations that the patient had. But if this condition is worse or is different or life-threatening, it becomes a serious adverse event or adverse event, an unanticipated event. And because hospitalization is involved, it becomes a serious adverse event. So the way you avoid problems when you have a monitoring visit or an audit is capturing everything in the medical history. If we capture that patient has a elective surgery planned 3 months from now and they're participating in the study, once that patient's hospitalized for that procedure, it is not an adverse event or nothing because it was in the medical history. If we don't capture it in the medical history and the patient has the elective surgery, we might mistakenly capture it as an adverse event or as an unanticipated event. Now, if that elective surgery gets prolonged hospitalization and we think that might be related to the study and meets all the 3 criteria, then we're talking about a unanticipated serious adverse event because of prolonged hospitalization. The third step is it greater risk or harm that was previously known or recognized? The risk may be physical, psychological, economic, or social. Was the risk described in the research protocol, informed consent, the investigator brochure, or other documents? So I'm repeating this so much because this is important to not over-report or under-report to the IRB. The adverse events or the unanticipated events must be unexpected, possibly related to the study, and greater or risk for or harm. If you can't absolutely 100% say that it's not related to the study, it's better to say that it's possibly related and report it to the IRB. Again, 14 days or 5 if it's the VA. So what happens when you, as a PI, determine that you have an unanticipated adverse event and the sponsor disagrees? So the sponsor notifies the PI in writing that the event is unanticipated problem because you determined that it was not an unanticipated problem and you didn't report it, but now the sponsor comes and says it is. Please get it in writing and all the documentation from the sponsor to understand why they're saying that it is unanticipated. And then, of course, we report it within 14 days to the IRB. The IRB might have determines if follow-up action is required or more information is needed. A study participant develops a rash on his torso that resolves within 24 hours. The PI reports that this is to the sponsor that's an adverse event, but it states that it did not place the participant at a greater risk and it's not reportable as an anticipated event. The sponsor disagrees and wants to you to report it to the IRB as an unanticipated adverse event. We will report this to the IRB. You can discuss with the sponsor, disagree, come to an agreement if you're going to report it or not. But if the sponsor stands their ground and they want you to report it, we must report it to the IRB within 14 days. So the sponsor releases the investigational new drug safety reports to notify all PIs and the FDA adverse events related to the investigational agent. These are the IND safety reports and MedWatch. IND safety reports is when a study site reports unanticipated events or serious adverse events to the sponsor. The sponsor turns around, reports it to the FDA. The FDA acknowledges. Now that sponsor has to redistribute all this information to all the study sites. Those are IND safety reports. MedWatch is when the FDA has new information about a drug or complications or adverse events and reports it. All these have to be reported to the IRB 14 days if we consider that they are an unanticipated problem and the PI makes that determination. Remember, here at the site, it's the PI that makes the determination if the IND safety report or the MedWatch meets all the criteria. If they don't meet all the 3 criteria, we do not report it to the IRB immediately. We can attach a summary to the IRB as in the continuing review, so they will be knowledgeable of what the FDA and the sponsor are reporting to the studies. Another reportable are protocol violations, deviations, and exceptions. We don't just report adverse events or unanticipated events. We must report all protocol deviations and deviations. So protocol violations, a departure from the IRB approved research plan that places the safety risk or welfare of more study participants at risk and or could impact the integrity of a study. Report the protocol violations to the IRB within 14 days of discovery of the continued review. The inclusion, an example, the inclusion-exclusion criteria are not used correctly to include or exclude participant. If study participants do not meet the inclusion criteria and are included in the study, it could result in harm or to the participant or jeopardize the integrity of the study. Or the informed consent forms were not signed before conducting screening or study activities. Study participants must be provided with accurate information about the study risk and benefits before they volunteer to participate in research. Remember, our study participants are the partners for the study. Without them, we can't do it. So it's important to have that informed consent process conversation of educating what we're expecting them during the study. So protocol violations are reported within 14 days of discovery and a continuing review. Reporting of protocol deviations. It's a protocol deviation and departure from the IRB approved research plan that does not put participants at risk and does not affect the integrity of the study. Report protocol deviations at continuing review. An example of that happened to us, and when I was conducting a study, we had a oncology trial that we were measuring the size of the tumor, and the primary endpoint of the study was measuring the size of that tumor. What happened at our site is several patients did not get that measurement. And when they came to me, it was like, well, it didn't put patients at risk. And then our biostatistician basically mentioned, well, wait, you don't have the primary objective. You are not able to complete the study. So you put these patients in unnecessary risk when you did not do the final determination or the measurement of this tumor. So you have to think of it globally. Are we putting patients unnecessarily on studies without getting the final objective or final endpoints? That's why it's important to follow the inclusion and exclusion criteria, follow all the study procedures, and everything that the study is recommending. The investigator conducts the procedure in the wrong sequence would be a protocol deviation. The change did not place patient safety, risk, or welfare, rights or welfare of the study participant at risk, and did not impact the integrity of the study. The investigator did not perform a required lab test. The missing lab test did not place the safety, rights, or welfare of participants at risk and did not impact the integrity. Report the protocol deviations at continuing review. This last example of the lab test, it's important to understand, is it a regular lab or is it a safety lab for the safety of the patient? And we will see that in the case of being a safety lab, we have to report it to the IRB because we're taking the patient's risk. So a protocol violation, a protocol deviation can also be a protocol violation depending on the circumstances. So you have to really analyze, what was that lab for? Is it just a routine lab test or was it for safety measures and protecting of the participants? Report of breach of PHI is also a reportable event. A breach of is an authorized acquisition, access, use, or disclosure of PHI that compromises privacy and security. We have to report any PHI breach to the HIPAA privacy officer. PHI includes limited data sets. Report any breach of PHI, any loss of data to the IRB within 14 days of discovery or a continuing review. This includes de-identified data and limited data sets. In case that we're participating with an investigator sponsored trial, the investigator sites would have to report this to the lead PI of the study. We have to report participant incarcerations. When a study participant is incarcerated, the participant status changes to a vulnerable population. And as you well know, vulnerable populations has a lot of considerations, so we have to report that to the IRB. Additional federal regulations apply to vulnerable populations. The IRB has to make specific determinations. All study interventions, interactions, and data collections should stop when the participant is incarcerated, and we have to report this within 14 days. The only exception is when the PI considers in the best interest of the participant to continue the participation, even though the participant is incarcerated, they would have to have a conversation with the IRB and decide what they're going to do and also get clearance from the sponsor if this is adequate. Remember, it's always about the patient safety and being patient-centric. So if it's in the best interest of the participant, we should continue the study participation. We have to report new safety information that's unanticipated problems. So as I mentioned before, IND safety reports, MedWatch, or anything else, new safety information reveals increased risk or reduced benefits to participants discovered during the study course of the study. Report new safety information to the IRB in 14 days. Examples, the sponsor revises the investigative brochure with new safety information, requiring a change in the protocol and informed consent. The FDA is requiring a label change identifying new side effects for an investigational agent. The sponsor PI must provide the informed consent to indicate additional risk. So any safety information, anything that might change the patient's mind of participating in the study should be an amendment of the informed consent. This is important to emphasize. Most likely, if it's a pharmaceutical trial, the sponsor of the pharmaceutical trial will indicate if reconsenting is necessary with the new information. It's important for the study team to determine what that reconsenting plan is. It's better to go to the IRB with a plan ahead of time than expecting the IRB to tell you how to reconsent all these patients. So in a long-term study, you will have patients that have been off study for 4 or 5 years. You have patients that are just screening to be in the study, and you have potential participants. So if you don't tell the IRB your plan, the IRB might say you have to reconsent everybody, even the people that have been off the study for 5 years. But if you go to the IRB with a plan saying, you know what, for people that have been off the study for 5 years, we're going to give them a notice, a letter saying that this is the new discovery or new information that came out. If you have any questions, please contact us or come to our site to do a safety lab, whatever the case might be. And then we do a modified informed consent and say to the IRB that any patient that is still participating in the study, is actively participating, those will be reconsented. And of course, for new participants, we will have a new informed consent process for those participants. That way, you're not stuck with whatever the IRB comes up with. And if the IRB doesn't like your plan, they will have to come up with a better plan for you to reconsent. So it's always better to suggest your plan than having the IRB dictate the plan. Another things that we have to report is emergent modifications that are changes made to the protocol to protect the safety, rights, and welfare of the participants. These are usually emergency cases, immediate hazard to one or more research participants. Emergent modifications are very rare, but they might happen. So the PI has to protect the patient, and they can change that protocol or the way it's written for that patient, but immediately turn around and report to the IRB within 14 days. And depending on the emergent modification, there might be a protocol amendment, informed consent, or suspension, or something about the study, but we have to determine what the emergent modification was. So the Data and Safety Monitoring Board identifies a significant risk in the patient and the risk of heart attack related to the investigational agent. Members of the research team contact the study participants immediately and tell them to discontinue taking the agent. There's no time to notify the IRB because of patient safety, of course, but we do have to turn around and report it to the IRB within 14 days. I understand I'm keeping on saying 14 days, 10 days. I like to do this. Once I discover an unanticipated event, don't wait the 14 days. If you have to report it to the IRB, to the sponsor, report it to them at the same time. That way you don't forget to report it to the sponsor, to the IRB. Same thing with death. If you're reporting to the sponsor, use that same notification that you did to the sponsor to the IRB. That way we don't forget and we're not non-compliance with IRB or with the sponsor requirements. Report federal or state regulatory inspections. If there's an audit, inspection, or inquiry by a federal agency that reports on a finding of 483, report those findings to the IRB within 14 days. A 483 might be that there's protocol violations, deviations, non-compliance, you're not following the study protocol as written. Remember, if it's an investigator-initiated trial or a pharmaceutical trial that has an IND, you're signing the 1572. The signing of the 1572 is a contract between the PI and the federal agency saying that you will run the study as written and approved by the IRB with no changes or anything, and the approved informed consent. Any questions?
Great, thanks very much, Rafael. As people are thinking, can I start with one? So
Yes.
with a fully de-identified data set, the reporting wouldn't be for breach of PHI, right? Would it be
No.
just for loss of the data?
Correct.
All right, this is just amazingly valuable information. Let's see, what questions do people have? Feel free to take yourself off mute and ask it, or raise your hand and I can call on you. Where's a good place, Rafael, to go to for these resources? The IRB page, I'm wondering, but
The IRB has a good place to go, and that's where I have that chart, and they specifically detail all the reportable events and the timelines, and they give examples, and they very detailed about it. If you don't understand, if you have a confusion, if it's a study coordinator, you can always reach out to the IRB. They're always willing to help out. If it's a sponsor-initiated trial, the FDA, the NIH, they're always willing to answer questions. They're always available to answer any concerns.
Thank you. And I see that Catherine has posted information on the reportable event requirements. Rhonda wonders, will we get a copy of the slides and the recording?
Oh, yes, I forgot to give it to Teresa. I'll do that immediately.
And I think that'll be very helpful. People will probably need to see it a few times before we will remember all the rules there. So that's great. Let's give people a few seconds here to see if there's other questions that are coming up. This is your golden opportunity, folks, to ask the questions you've always been wondering. Karen Olson is asking, if a sample is lost or needs to be redrawn for any reason due to sample issues, is this considered a protocol deviation if the safety labs are done prior to next dose? Or is
Yes,
this?
it'd be considered a protocol deviation. You're bringing the patient in unless there's an unscheduled visit or the protocol takes that into consideration, but it is a protocol deviation.
Great, thank you.
And that would require a change to the IRB protocol if you're going to redraw a blood draw, for example. So that might be a reportable event if that was the result of like a lab process gone wrong. But then the process for recontacting subjects and getting consent for any repeat procedures would probably also entail a change of protocol.
Correct. It's important to always keep the IRB notified of these changes.
Just checking the chat to see if there's any other questions for Rafael.
I think I would really like to insist the responsibilities of a PI at the site versus the investigator sponsor. It's more complex. The investigator sponsor, a lot more responsibilities, notifying every site that's participating in trials about new information, safety information, getting those sites to report to the investigator sponsor all the situations that are reported to the IRB so they can make a timely report to the FDA. It's important to keep the FDA informed, the IRB, to keep those INDs within the regulatory constraint.
This is Karen. So in the situation, like we've had a couple times, these are so industry sponsored studies. In a situation where there's a sample got frozen in the wintertime and the sponsor requires redraw, it's really already within the protocol to redraw prior to dose. That would not then have to be reported to the IRB. Other than a protocol deviation. It's not a change in protocol if they're requesting and it's written,
Correct.
if
it's written in the protocol, correct. It's kind of like I mentioned about death. If death is an endpoint and the protocol explains that it's death as an endpoint, you do not have to report it. Some protocols will write adverse events of special interest that don't meet these criteria of unanticipated or serious, but it's something that the sponsor needs to capture. So we will be capturing those as adverse events of interest or serious adverse of interest. So always follow the study protocol as written.
Okay, there are a few questions. So I'm just going to start reading these from the top. So Kelly Miller, how are coordinators logging this info? I don't think the EDC or CTMS are set up to log these to track trends. Kelly, if you want to provide more detail to your question, please come off mute and say that.
What was the question?
So I think the question she's wondering is how are coordinators tracking this info about the AEs and the...
So for example, on individual participants, you can create a AE log, and it's great to have it because you can write the AE when it started, When it stops, it's a related, serious, and the assessments that the PI has made. And in that log, you'll just keep it for each individual participant. And the PI on a regular basis will look at these individually per PI, per patient, and we can look at it as cumulative and be able to determine if there's a situation that, AE keeps up on appearing and, we have that situation. Same thing for serious adverse events. We can keep a log. Remember that when you're reporting a death to the IRB, you might report it at the beginning of February, but once the continuing review happens in 12 months, they don't have that information necessarily in front of them for all the reviewers. So it's important to give a little summary of what has happened during that year so the IRB can make a good determination of these situations.
So the log will be helpful for that too. There's a question, I'm not sure I understand the reporting requirements for a phlebotomist who gets poked by a Hep B participant.
So in that one, you have several requirements. One, you have to, if you're a UW Health employee, you have to go to safety risk management so they can do all your testing and everything as the employer. For the study participation, it's an unanticipated event because it's related to the study participation. If you weren't drawing blood on that study participant, you would not have gotten poked. Now, depending on what we're studying, if the patient has hepatitis B, HIV, or some type of disease that might be transmittable, it's a higher risk for that person. So those are reportable to the IRB. It's all about safety of the study team. Another one that you could think about is in a study, we give medication to the participant. They go home and their grandkid gets into the medication and takes all the pills, and that's an overdose. Well, wait, the grandkid's not a participant, but it's a family member of a participant, and it's an unanticipated event that could be life-threatening to that kid. So we have to report that to the IRB. It's not just what happens to that participant.
Thank you. Next one is regarding participant status updating to incarceration or vulnerable. How is this change in status communicated or can be discovered by the team? So for instance, how would you find out that your participant has been incarcerated?
Well, hopefully you're in constant communication with the participant for follow-up visits, information. If they don't show up for a visit, you have to do the 3 phone calls and notification. Usually you'll find out. They'll let you know they're either running low on medication or they're contacted by a collect call from the prison. Whatever the situation is, the likelihood is that you'll find out. Remember, it's when you discover the situation that you have to report it. And how you document it in Encore, you just discontinue or you terminate the participation of this person. And the reason of participation, ending of the participation, is incarceration.
Thank you. So then to fully answer your question, Nora, there is no registry that we can monitor to see who's being incarcerated that I'm aware of. And it may be that the participant wouldn't be able to tell you if they can't communicate, but eventually you will probably find out through that.
Hopefully you've done a really great informed consent process. If it's intervention or medication, they'll let you know. I had a case that the patient called me collect from jail to tell me that they couldn't make the visit. So.
And then Catherine and Jessica have posted some really great resources in the chat. Another question, when will non-oncology be able to use CT-CAE in HealthLink?
That's a very good question. I've always been fighting that everybody should have access to that because we report adverse events just like oncology does. So that should be available for the whole team. I know they rolled it out over a year ago for oncology. It would be nice that non-oncology trials also have access to that SAE reporting, the version 5 of the CT-CAE.
But I don't know that we have a timeline, do we?
No, we don't. I wish we could just turn it on for us.
But it's definitely something that a great deal of thought.
It would make life a lot easier because it would be captured within the medical record and saved there.
So clinical research toolkit not available on ICTR's website, now refers to CTI's website. Is there a location to find examples of AE logs or other study document templates?
I could come up with some of them. Basically, it's you could do it in an Excel spreadsheet, putting patient ID on the left side, and then putting start of adverse event, stop date of adverse event, interventions, medications. Was it mild, moderate, severe? related to study drug, and you just check those boxes off. It's simple to make it on an Excel spreadsheet. And it's the same information that the IRB requires to be reported, so you just transfer it.
I think we can share a log as well with people just as an example, and they can adapt that. See what we can do about that. UW-IRB, Advara, and WCG-IRB do not want a list of minor deviations at continuing review. Other IRBs I work with do not want them either. So is that still the case, or is that going to be changing?
I recommend to give them a summary, because how can the IRB do a full review of the study if they don't have the full picture of the situation? So you might have one deviation, or you can have 1,000 deviations. If you have 1,000 deviations, I would start questioning, is the protocol written correctly? Is there a non-compliance with the study protocol? Are we not following? Is it the study staff not doing their job? What is going on? But if the IRB doesn't get that information, they can't ask the right questions to see if the study can continue or not. So it makes a big difference of what we're doing. Now, the FDA did take a big step about IND safety reports. We used to have all the numerators. We had thousands of reports, but never the denominator. So we didn't know in how many patients the adverse event happened. And that's why we switched to unanticipated events. But regarding the summary of deviations, violations, deaths, unanticipated events, it's a way to give the IRB a picture. It doesn't have to be a full report. It could be a copy of your Excel spreadsheet, so they can see if there's a trend or if there's something happening with the trial. And my biggest concern is when I notice a trial has a lot of deviations, I'm concerned that, one, they're not following the study protocol. Two, we need to train the staff a little bit better. Or three, the PI is not really engaged and everything's happening the wrong way.
Thanks, Rafael. Catherine, if you'd like to comment on this from the IRB perspective, you're welcome to.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Nasia. Yeah, we don't request that log at the time of continuing review. It's not really what we're looking at. And I think trends like that would be identified in ways outside of continuing review and outside of what the IRB is looking at in terms of that, because we're not primarily a data safety monitoring board. We can't really identify trends that come in that way. We do ask, as you said, for patient complaints that are maybe unresolved by the study team. We ask for external data monitoring reports. So we do get information that way. So our form will ask you for various supporting documentations at the time of continuing review. But in terms of what needs to be reported and when, I would just say go to the website, look at our reportable event section of the IM, and that outlines very clearly what kind of deviations need to be reported, which ones might fall into our kind of administrative basket that doesn't need to be reported, but still needs to be tracked by the study team for all those reasons that Rafael mentioned to kind of identify things. So I would just direct people there for guidance on what needs to be reported and the time frame and when and how. And if you have questions too, you can always reach out about a specific incident and whether or not it meets reporting requirements and what the best mechanism for that is.
I would say the important thing is you have to be in compliance with the IRB. So just follow their requirements, their reporting structure and everything else. If you over-report, they'll let you know, or things like that. But like I said, if you follow what the IRB requires, you're in compliance with the IRB and you don't have anything to worry about. But it is a good idea that the study team keeps an eye on these situations and trends and repeat adverse events.
I've also found that it might be a good practice that before you start enrolling participants, that you make a communication plan, go over the IRB website and write down exactly how you will be doing it and who will be doing it. And then maybe even do a dry run just to see that everybody understands the process. Because in the moment when something bad is potentially happening to a participant, you know, adrenaline may be running high and it's difficult.
And it's important for the PI to demonstrate that they were involved in the assessment of the AE or the serious adverse event. We just had an audit from a sponsor and the PI got a slap in their hand because it seemed like the study coordinator collected all the data, made the assessments, made everything else, but nowhere in the medical record and the source documents in the patient's record was a determination by the study PI. I know this PI did do the determination, but in research, if it's not documented, it's not done. So they got dinged by saying that there was not oversight of this PI on these assessments. So as a PI, as an investigator sponsor, always have things documented, what you're doing, the assessment and things like that, to prove to the FDA that you were the one that did the inclusion exclusion criteria verification, that you did the assessment of the AE or the serious adverse event.
Thank you. Question, what is the best way to log and report participant complaints? I know these are often asked about during continuing reviews, as Catherine just said, but are not tracked as adverse events or protocol deviations and can often be overlooked by study teams as something to track.
Depending on the participant complaint, if you do a good informed consent process, the IRB number is on the informed consent and also the patient representative. So if you go over that section, you let the patient know if they have concerns or questions or something happens during the study, they could always feel free to communicate with the IRB or the PI directly. If the complaint comes directly to the PI, then we have the obligation to turn around and report it to the IRB. But usually when it's complaints about the study, patients go directly to the IRB or to the hospital patient representative. You will hear about it.
There's a comment that many industry sponsors either require or likely will require use of CTCAE for AE collection and reporting. So I think this is something that's on the radar.
Yeah, that's why I was saying I wish we could use it, because that's how we report it to the sponsors. It's not just something specific for oncology.
And then the other comments pertain to, work with the websites of the various IRBs, and they're very specific about how they want things to be reported. So as long as you're following their directions, you should be fine. Let me just check if I'm overlooking anything. Any questions that I did not bring up, please feel free to ask it.
And the important thing is, if you have any doubts, contact the IRB. Catherine is always available to answer questions. She's great. She'll help you.
Oops, I'm just checking the chat to see if there's any other questions here that we're missing. And Jessica says, I'm here as well, and we really appreciate that. Thank you very much. The resources that have been posted are incredibly helpful. So Jessica is the point person, is what she mentions in the chat. Right. Last call for questions. I'll give people some time to ask it.
And the last thing I would like to say is, remember, the PI is the ultimately responsible, accountable for the study. It doesn't matter what they delegate, they're ultimately responsible and accountable. They should be doing the assessments. They should be worried about patient protection. They should be engaged. They should be available when a serious adverse event happens. I get sometimes calls from the floor saying there's something happening and they can't reach the PI. That's why it's important to have sub-investigators to be available if a PI is busy or on vacation or something like that. But the responsibility for the FDA is always the PI, ultimately responsible and accountable, also for the IRB. It's not the study coordinator. It's not the study team. It's the PI.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And on that note, I'm not seeing any other questions. Rafael, really appreciate the amazing information you shared. We will send along the slides. And thank you, everyone, for a robust participation.
Thank
There
you.
is no CME, unfortunately. Bye-bye.